Rimward Operations Area, Fronc Reaches, Mcevans Sacrifice, 3135. It's still a stressful feeling, even when you're well prepared for pirates. All your plans could go perfectly, every nut and bolt falling into place just at the right moment, and still you could be on the edge of life and death out here in the Periphery. There are no do-overs, the fights aren't fair, and reinforcements aren't coming. As Marshal Brixton Pine chewed a piece of caffeine-infused gum, he kept his eyes on the scanners. Somewhere in the north, the pirate dropship had landed and disengorged the murderous cargo. It was obvious where they were headed, and everyone in Pine's platoon knew this would be an unexpected test of their training and equipment. The clear target, one of the few possible locations on Mcevans Sacrifice worth pillaging, was a facility that produced parts for the battle armor that he and the rest of the Marshals were wearing. While a platoon of ordinary foot soldiers might not phase a battle mech, the tin star battle armor that they were clad in evened the odds considerably. Time would tell if they would be needed, though hopefully the lance of Marshal mechs would cut down the pirates before they came within range of the facility. The communications link with the Marshal lance lit up with each of the Mechwarriors calling out targets, focusing fire, and trying to end things quickly. Brixton counted the seconds. Each that passed ratcheted up his concern, especially when the Mechwarriors began to shout out to each other that the raiders were blowing right past them. "Marshals, be ready. We have a lance of lights headed our way. Stay quiet and out of sight until you have my call," Pine said as he quadruple checked that his Gauss rifle and support PPC were status green and ready to go. Across the grounds of the small factory, the 25 Marshals hid as best they could in their battle armor, somewhere inside the various buildings ready to shoot through windows. Others hid behind stacked crates. One was even hiding in a vehicle repair pit, ready to climb out and unleash heck. The dust cloud was visible first as Pine peeked out over the facility's outer walls. The Marshal Mechwarriors were giving chase, but the light mechs would have a good 3 or 4 minutes to cause carnage at the facility if Pine's tin stars couldn't stop them. Of course, that was his intent. The pirate mechs closed on the facility, a few medium laser shots cutting into the outer walls, burning away the mixture of ferrocrete and dried mud brick patches. "Alright folks, they're here. You'll have my word when it's right," Pine said into the local comlink. The northern wall began to burn, then exploded as several SRMs slammed into its weakened structure. Through the gap stomped 4 pirate mechs. The first was a 20-ton Stinger, the next a much deadlier 25-ton Commando. They slowed when they entered the factory courtyard, while the 30-ton Spider and a second 20-ton Stinger made their way through the hole in the wall. As if paranoid of the silence, the mechs hesitated, and that's when Pine put out the call. "Focus fire on the legs of the Spider. Bring that gal down on 1, 3, 2, 1. When he reached 1, he fired his aimed shots at the battle mech's right leg. Though a single David Gauss round or support PPC shot would only do minor damage to the plating of a mech, the combined fire of more than 20 tin stars cut through the mech's legs like an acetylene torch through butter. The Spider's Mechwarrior tried to step forward and bring its weapons to bear in reaction to the incoming fire all around it, but the hip actuator swung a limb that was no longer there, and the 30-ton mech crashed to the ferrocrete face first. "Stinger, now!" Pine yelled as he lined up his next shot. All heck did break loose as the 3 remaining pirate mechs began to move around the courtyard, firing wildly at every target that presented itself. More often than not, the machine gun and laser fire hit the ground, building walls, and dozens of other objects that were not Pine's Marshals. Shot after shot hit the Stinger, and its already paper-thin armor crumpled and burned. It was able to take a half-dozen steps before it too collapsed to the ground. The torso spewed sparks and an ink-black smoke that quickly began to rise up into the air as a marker of the chaos that surrounded them. "Squad 2, try to box in that Commando. Squad 1 and 3, get on that other Stinger. Let's finish this quickly," Pine said as he moved his suit swiftly over the wall's small rampart. Leaping down, he hit the ground running and aimed himself at the Stinger, which was already starting to back up toward the crumbled wall entry. Clearly in a panic, the Stinger's Mechwarrior fired in all directions, swinging its medium laser as if it were a club as the tin stars closed in. The mech's machine guns tore up the ground, scoring the occasional hit on the battlesuit, but not enough to put one down for good. When Pine and the others reached the mech's legs, they fired up into the exposed actuators just as they had been trained to do over 100 times before. The Stinger began to screech as actuators burned and ground metal against metal on parts that were melting and being blasted into scrap. In one last desperate act, the Mechwarrior fired its jump jets, which slowly began to lift it up from the ground. Unfortunately, the stresses involved with rising on plumes of plasma only accelerated the mech's demise as it fell apart from every joint. Now legless, the Stinger's torso and arms slammed down into the ferrocrate and did not move again. Turning his attention to the commando, Pine was driven into a fury by the sight of one of his marshals being crushed under the foot of a mech. Occasional shots pelted the pitted and scarred armor of the battle mech as it accelerated into a run across the courtyard. For a moment it looked as if it was trying to take the crushed Tin Star armor underfoot with it like a predator bird carrying off prey, but instead the motionless Marshal's armor slid across the ferrocrete a few meters. Shots chased after the commando, but none found purchase. It bounced off one of the sides of the blasted hole in the wall before making a break to the northwest. The local comlink fell silent as several marshals tended to the fallen comrade while others climbed onto the defeated pirate mechs. The Spider's pirate tried to surrender, but that wasn't in the cards. Marshals didn't give quarter to pirates. Of all of our trips across the Periphery, we've seen some pretty unbelievable things. From cosplaying Roman pirates to fascist farmers in league with pirates. We even got to see some pirates cosplaying as pirates. I think I'm finally noticing a pattern here. Maybe you are too. At least the magistracy of Canopus isn't doing anything strange. Never mind. Today we're going to visit a hotly contested region of the Periphery where one of history's newest states has been struggling to survive and thrive over the course of the past 100 years. Though it is quite small in comparison to its neighbors, this plucky little Periphery state has already made a name for itself and is starting to impact the history of humanity well beyond its borders. Of course, I speak of the Fronc Reaches. Though only officially declared an independent state in April 9th of 3066, the history of the planets of the Fronc Reaches have a history that goes back much further. Settlement on the capital planet, Fronc, dates back to at least 3022, though records are pretty sparse, so it's possible that the first people to set foot on the planet did so much earlier. On the planet Herodotus, settlement dates back to at least 2750, though it is closer to the border with the Inner Sphere. What can be said for certain is that the region that would eventually be known as the Fronc Reaches had been an on-again, off-again interest of the states around it for years and years. At the dawn of the 31st century, the magistracy of Canopus, Taurian Concordat, and Capellan Confederation were intensely interested in developing that region of space. Not just to improve political relations between them, but also exploit resource-rich planets like Detroit. In what was called the New Colony region, a significant amount of capital was invested in developing colonies into functioning economies. The prospect of living under the protection of the larger states around them was attractive for the new colonists of planets like Detroit, Spencer, and Independence. However, the reality didn't quite fit the promise as time progressed. The attention that the Concordat and the magistracy gave to this region would wax and wane over the years, which opened the planets up to predation from pirates, which have always plagued that sector of the Periphery. The planets of the New Colony region petitioned their benefactors over and over trying to get help in facing the issues those states should have seen coming when starting new colonies. For the most part, those requests for aid were ignored or done in a haphazard way that caused more harm than good. Though, of course, the taxation was always there. By 3060, the colonial marshals, which had been formed in an attempt to police the region and fight back against piracy, felt the pressure to boldly act. If the magistracy and Taurians were not going to protect the people of the New Colony region, yet still levy heavy taxation upon them with nothing in return, then they would have to go their own way. Unfortunately, these frustrations would lead to calamity under the leadership of a burnt-out president named Sherman Malton, who decided it would be a good idea to jump at the opportunity and take Magistrix Emma Centrella, Protector Geoffrey Calderon, and Chancellor Sun Tzu Liao hostage during a planned summit on Detroit, and then declare independence while putting the rest of the Inner Sphere on notice. This went about as poorly as you might expect. Chancellor Sun Tzu pulled out of the summit due to an unrelated assassination attempt, but Calderon and Centrella were taken by Malton's forces. Instead of bowing to their demands, the magistracy convinced the Capellans to form a joint task force to crush the rebels and rescue both Calderon and Centrella. The joint MAF Capellan Rescue Force hammered the New Colony region marshals, who were well dug in but totally outgunned. While the Magistrix was rescued, Geoffrey Calderon died in the attempt. This would have significant regional consequences, and definitely didn't help the people of the new colony region get any closer to independence. The resulting Trinity Alliance in August of 3062 between the Magistracy of Canopus, the Capellan Confederation, and the Taurian Concordat left a bitter taste for many in the new colony region who believed that they had been manipulated into a doomed independence effort by Sun Tzu Liao. True or not, it would be another 3 years before there'd be a successful movement on the front of NCR independence. With even more Magistracy and Taurian resources going elsewhere, the people of the new colony region felt abandoned and compelled to act. Finally, out of frustration from years of being ignored, the NCR president Carver Trondell sent ambassadors to each of the major Innersphere houses and Comstar in hope of seeking recognition for the Fronc Reaches as an independent state. To their credit, both Comstar and the Free Rosselhog Republic extended that recognition immediately. Though self-interested in their motivations, the Draconis Combine and the Free Worlds League followed suit with their own affirmations. The Fronc Declaration of Independence reads as so. Whereas we, the people of the former New Colony region, wish to claim for ourselves and our posterity the blessings of liberty that all by right should enjoy, and whereas we, the people, have honestly attempted to secure those blessings within the laws and values of our mother nations, and whereas those attempts have failed through no fault of ours, but instead have floundered in the intransigence of others, most particularly George Grover Schraplin of the Taurian Concordat. And whereas we the people do not consent to join pernicious foreign alliances, such as that with House Liao, on which both of our mother nations unfortunately chose to enmesh themselves, and whereas said foreign alliances have resulted in policies that violate the most cherished values of our mother nations, most particularly the equitable allocation of tax revenues, to the detriment of the new colony region, as well as our Taurian and Canopian brothers and sisters. Be it resolved, therefore, that the new colony region from this day no longer exists. We, the citizens of the Fronc Reaches, do declare our independence, now and for all time. It is our fond hope that our mother nations will someday disentangle themselves from the concerns of foreign empires, so that we may restore our ties with them as friends and equals. Declaration presented on Taurus by Sierra Turner, Fronc Reaches Ambassador to the Concordat, 28 February 3066. Encouraged by the response from the Innersphere states, and with broad local support, President Trondell took antagonistic action and booted the Canopian and Taurian government bureaucrats from Fronc Reaches planets. This included military units, which caused some drama, as some were reluctant to give up their bases and footholds. The Canopians balked at giving up control of Detroit, which had become an important industrial hub in the region, and actually sent more soldiers to defend their claim over it. Still, the transfer of control was remarkably peaceful. With Detroit firmly in their control, the Canopians essentially wrote the rest of the Fronc Reaches off as not worth the trouble, which caused drama within the Taurian Concordat, as a unified response to crush this attempt to break away became impossible. It caused such an internal strife within the Concordat that it nearly collapsed into a civil war when 6 planets on the far side of the Concordat also declared independence, but that's another story. What held those 8 planets of the Fronc Reaches together in those early years was the policing military unit known as the Colonial Marshals. They had been the only real force in the Reaches for years, and their job of establishing order, hunting down pirates, and handing out justice became even more important with time. With tax revenue now staying local, the Marshals were able to expand their forces and have a positive influence on the planets under their watch. Of course, this is the Periphery, and it is on brand that their response to pirates is rather extreme. In 3071, when Force Commander Dirk Mcevans was asked to respond to complaints from refugees that witnessed Marshal Duke Marion executing captured and bound pirates, he said,
"I guess I just don't see your problem. That's how we handle them in the Reaches. They come here, they die, and not after draining the public's coffers to clothe, feed, and house them for decades. If you don't like it, the Sphere is more than happy to waste money on thieves, murderers, and slavers. Look at how that worked out with Lady Death."
The Marshals are known for being very selective concerning who can join their units and which mercenaries can receive contracts within the Fronc Reaches government. If there is any history of piracy or otherwise lawless behavior, that is more than enough to get a prospective contract cancelled and the mercenaries sent on their way. The Marshals have very little sense of humor and aren't above using violence when necessary to fight piracy and lawbreaking. This has served the Fronc Reaches well, as issues with mercenary groups have been few and far between. Besides a few notable exceptions, pirate groups in the area know that if they make the choice to head to a Fronc-controlled planet, they risk certain death. It has likely deterred more than a few planned incursions. As of 3058, the primary battle mech used by the Marshals was the MHL X-1 Marshal, which I suppose you could have predicted. At 55 tons, the Marshal is a good general-purpose mech, with a good mix of long, medium, and short-range weapons. It was produced by the Taurians and provided to the Marshals due to an agreement brokered by the Canopians. It's unclear if this agreement extended beyond that 3066 Declaration of Independence. I would presume not, though with the original goal of making sure every Marshal had one by the end of 3060, it's likely there's still more than a few in service today. The new Fronc Reaches government acted quickly to create an official military training system to bolster the defenses of their new nation. Just as the word of Blake was starting to tear the Inner Sphere apart, the newly formed Fronc Reaches Sentinels gained many refugee recruits who had experience as soldiers, but were displaced by the chaos. The Marshals also constructed their own academy on Fronc under the authority of the President. The Fronc Sentinels were tasked with handling military threats from outside the Reaches, while the Marshals continued to police from within the borders. Their commitment to the task has become quasi-legendary, with the Marshals willing to put themselves at great risk of harm or death in order to protect the citizenry of the Fronc Reaches. This dedication has fostered a strong connection and support from the people. The fledgling nation benefited from being too small and too inconsequential to crush in those early years. The larger nations of the Inner Sphere and Periphery were busy dealing with the word of Blake, and that left the Fronc Reaches with only the usual threat from pirate groups. By 3085, the Marshals had expanded their forces to include almost a full regiment of mechs, along with many more tanks, vehicles, and even battle armor. With numbers to actually run patrols, pirate activity and general criminal behavior fell in cities across the Reaches. Of course, with all those new soldiers, they're going to need equipment. The Fronc Reaches, showing a level of understanding of how things work, decided to put a considerable amount of battle mech designs and even their own battle armor design. What couldn't be produced locally was purchased from the Filtvelt Coalition and even the Calderon Protectorate. The ultimate goal was to be able to defend power down the road. Examples of domestic production included the J. Edgar Light Hover Tank, the Hetzer, Vedette Tank, and later on the Tin Star battle armor. While the Fronc Reaches rode out the states of the Inner Sphere and Periphery, were left to consolidate with what they had and to rebuild. The Fronc Reaches saw a big population boost due to the arrival of refugees, and with both the Magistracy of Canopus and the Taurian Concordat rebuilding, it was a profitable time. With more resources available to combat piracy, the larger Periphery states pushed the pirates to seek easier targets. Unfortunately, that meant an increase in raiding of Fronc Reaches assets, in spite of the Marshals' efforts. While the Marshals' reputation for not taking prisoners when dealing with pirates might have kept the smaller groups at bay, it pushed the larger pirate bands to adopt similarly brutal tactics when on raids, resulting in more bloodshed across the citizenry. The frequency and intensity of these deadly raids increased over time, and it became obvious to the Fronc government that reacting defensively was not a viable long-term strategy. Being unable to defend every location on every planet at the same time led to pirate bands coordinating strikes and leaving burning settlements, storehouses, and factories in their wake. Eventually, a pirate was captured who ended up spilling what he knew about a coordinated raid in an attempt to save his own life. In 3088, the Marshals, under Force Commander Dirk Mcevans and Deputy Force Commander Marvel Dillon, set a trap for the overconfident pirates. The interrogation yielded the locations and times for the next few raids, and the Marshals were able to set up defenses. On the planet Portland, the defenders caused significant damage on the pirate force, but ultimately let them escape with some materials and gear, Within that loot was planted information that suggested a secret high-value shipment was destined for a factory on the planet Independence. At the site of another pirate attack on the planet Mcevans Sacrifice, the pirates were able to overwhelm the planetary militia and the Marshals in order to pillage the local gem district of the major city. To the Marshals' credit, they fought tenaciously and caused significant damage, though this pirate group left without taking any deliberately planted info. By coincidence, they also happened to keep their hideout on Independence itself. So just to make that clear, they didn't pick up the false info, but they did return back to the planet where the trap was being laid anyway. So how's that for rotten pirate luck? The raid on Mechwarrior was a near-complete disaster as the bulk of pirate forces known as Calderon's Commando arrived with almost their entire cadre. The goal of the pirates was to completely decimate the home of the Fronc military and recently completed academy so that future raids would be easier across the Reaches. While they were successful in destroying the primary base, it came at a cost of significant casualties, and the Marshals were able to make sure the Calderon's Commando left the planet carrying the honeypot information about a huge prize to be won on Independence. Even with the tremendous setbacks, the traps were still set on Independence with the bulk of what remained of the Marshals' forces. In orbit around Independence, 2 dropships full of Marshals waited for the arrival of the pirates. Each ship sat at the midpoint between the planet and jump point. When the Calderon Commando jump ship entered the system and dislodged their dropships, the Marshals burned hard to meet the jump ship. The dropships passed each other without the pirates immediately noticing. The Marshals boarded the jump ship and took it by force, rendering any escape by the pirates to be impossible. The other Marshal dropship, that was waiting at the midpoint between the other jump point, burned towards Independence in order to be there before the pirates could land. While the Marshals and Calderon's Commando were fighting over the baited factory, other pirate forces showed up. The Marshals were very nearly routed by their combined power until the second Marshal dropship arrived from the jump point. Performing a combat drop, the newly arrived Marshals evened the odds in what became an epic slugfest. Eventually, the pirates began to retreat after taking heavy losses. Calderon's Commando, knowing that their jump ship was gone, agreed to hitch a ride with one of the other pirate bands on theirs. In what would be known as the Battle of Independence, the Marshals ended up hobbling all 3 major pirate organizations to the point where they sought out new homes well away from the Fronc Reaches. While badly mauled, the Marshals would survive and eventually thrive thanks to the information they garnered from the computers of that captured pirate jump ship. Pirate bases and outposts were mapped and then obliterated, which gave the people of the Fronc Reaches some much-needed breathing room. A new academy would be built on Fronc in 3093, and it's been producing graduates ever since, which are quickly picked up by either the Marshals or the Fronc Reaches Sentinels. Throughout the Dark Age, the Fronc Reaches struggled with developing a more advanced system of industrial tools for mech production. 2 existing weapons producers were ordered by the Fronc president to expand operations and seek out the knowledge needed to start producing battle mechs domestically. Eventually, small numbers of mechs like the Hunchback 4G, Rifleman 3N, Clint 3T, and Toro would start rolling off the assembly lines of the curiously named Colonial Tractor Corporation. It reminds me a little bit of IBM keeping their old school name for some gravitas. Interstellar Arms of Mechwarrior was able to expand into vehicle and mech production in 3105 with the Vedette tank, the Locust 1V, Wasp 1A, and Stinger 3R models. The future of the Fronc Reaches in the Ill Clan era is absolutely uncertain, which seems to be the case for even the once great houses of the Inner Sphere. With the Magistracy of Canopus and the Capellan Confederation increasingly close politically, it's quite possible that this tiny Fronc Reaches region could end up in the crosshairs. It may end up depending on just how long the Free Worlds League remains a basket case, and if the Capellans can find a way to Terra, or are repulsed by the Ill Clan. As far as the goals for Fronc go, the 11 worlds that now make up this plucky Periphery nation could continue to focus on developing economically and industrially while keeping their heads down. At least that's what I would do. Let your big neighbors squabble with each other and just stay out of it. If you're looking for a good locale for some Periphery stories, the planets of the Fronc Reaches would be a good pick. Places like Portland, Mechwarrior, Independence, and Mcevans Sacrifice have some backstory outlined in the recent release of Operational Turning Points. This is all good ground for a Mechwarrior's backstory. If you want something more adventurous, the planet Herodotus has a much more extensive history, first as an independent Periphery planet and then later incorporated into the Fronc Reaches. It has a bit of a wild past involving a group called the New Hedons, who took over and turned Herodotus into a pleasure planet reminiscent of the early days of the magistracy of Canopus. I would love to see more on the Fronc Reaches from Catalyst in the future, specifically socially and culturally, as most of all the existing formation I was able to pull from the sourcebooks involved the military history. Beyond knowing that the Fronc government has a president and that the Fronc Reaches dollar trades at 85% of a C-bill in 3133, there doesn't seem to be much out there. Of course, we can infer from their origins as colonies of the magistracy and the Taurian Concordat that there would be some baseline cultural similarities. But it would be interesting to see how those cultures mesh on some of those worlds where they both have contact with each other. With that, I'll say thanks for coming by and exploring the Fronc Reaches with me today. If you enjoyed the video and want to see more, don't forget to like it and subscribe to the channel. It lets YouTube's algorithm know that it's worth sharing with new people who might appreciate the BattleTech nonsense. Big thanks to the Ko-Fi supporters and YouTube channel members who are going above and beyond to help keep the lights on around here. I appreciate it and you. One last thanks to Wildcat144 on Twitter and Commissar Azura on Twitter and Twitch for letting me use their cool Catgirl Mechwarrior art. They're both very talented, and I'll include their contact links in the video notes below if you want to check them out. Until we meet again, take care and go make the world a slightly better place today and tomorrow.